Welcome back to another rectangular table discussion. That last episode kind of confirmed a lot of the things that I had been saying all along. I love the feeling when I predict something, and even though we got a little bit of misdirection in episode 6 that made me doubt myself for a second, it came true that it's looking like Agatha was really the one that's controlling everything, as Eric and I both had been alluding to in a lot of our RTDs thus far. The first thing I wanted to say as we get started here is this was very clearly a mashup of Modern Family and The Office. The most significant things I noticed were obviously the intro theme song mirrored The Office. The other thing that I kind of noticed that I thought mirrored The Office was when Vision was doing the little stand aside, he gave one of the Jim Halpert kind of glances at the camera. I don't know if you caught that. To me, that was a very nice nod to The Office as well.
Yeah, a lot of the 2010s sitcoms did the whole interview thing where they were making fun of the VH1 reality shows. April on Parks and Rec is always glancing at the camera, even in the scenes.
Okay, so the first thing that I wanted to talk about was, as I was watching this more and more, I was wondering if perhaps instead of a Wanda created hex, I'm actually curious if the dome thing is actually Mephisto's realm at all. We had been discussing that we think Mephisto's lurking in the shadows somewhere, or we think that it's probably a possibility that Mephisto is going to end up being significant towards the end of the show.
So in Thor 2, they were talking about there were mystical convergence points that they were and that's how they could hop back and forth between places. So Westview, New Jersey might just be another mystical convergence point. The stairway down to Agatha's basement might be she opened a portal to, or had a portal to Mephisto's realm. The more I thought about the last episode, though, and that the fact that the people were walking around like zombies, in Dormammu's Dark Dimension, the creatures that live there become the mindless ones, which are in the comics, they look like these zombie mud monsters with one eye. But the fact that they were walking around zombified is they're being siphoned off into something. In the early Doctor Strange stories, Dormammu was one of the deities that he draws power from to do spells, but he realizes that it gives Dormammu a further grasp on our reality, so he's I gotta banish him and stop using him. Since Dormammu can't invade Earth himself anymore, he tries to trick Loki into getting the Avengers and the Defenders to assemble what it's called the Evil Eye. So I think Project Cataract is a nod to that. But the Evil Eye, when connected, will merge the realms so that if Earth is part of the Dark Dimension, Dormammu can take it over somehow.
You think that the ultimate villain of this show is Dormammu, and so are you under the mindset that Mephisto probably isn't quite involved yet? There has been evidence in the show so far that it could be Nightmare, and there have been some things that we noticed that it could be Mephisto. Now I'm going to mention somebody that neither of us have really brought up yet in our rectangular table discussions. This is a bit of a wild card, but the more I watched this episode and kind of saw how things ended up playing out, where Agatha basically looked like she was possessed by somebody, and also it looked like she took control of Scarlet Witch, that kind of got me thinking and led me to believe that it's possible that the antagonist is actually the Shadow King. Partially why I think that is because it's clear to me that they're trying to set up future X-Men things. Shadow King has been a very important X-Men plot device over the years. I also know that Shadow King would lead into the Storm origin story, and I believe Storm was thought to be the first X-Men character that they were going to introduce. Because the main actor for Black Panther died, I think they would have to call it a bit of an audible on that, because if they're going to make Shuri the Black Panther, it doesn't necessarily make a ton of sense for them to link Storm that way. I suppose they still could, but most people probably would prefer the T'Challa thing. And now that the T'Challa of the MCU is dead in reality, I think that The Shadow King would be a surprise for the audience. I don't think many people would see that coming. And it also makes sense because he's a guy that can basically possess other people and use his telepathic abilities. I think that he either took control of Agatha Harkness or he took control of who we're seeing as the Evan Peters character. And one way or the other, I think he's using those two to manipulate Scarlet Witch.
I don't think that they can rush into X-Men stuff right away. I think that they have to develop and pay off stuff they already had going. Shadow King would be cool and a new interesting thing they could do with the X-Men when they start making X-Men stuff. It's not something that Fox touched. They did kind of try to shoehorn Spider-Man into the Civil War movie as soon as they got him, so they are probably going to try to do is sprinkle X-Men stuff in whenever they can. But I think they already had plans and villains lined up that they were going to do stuff with. They already had Dormammu, who may or may not be in cahoots with Mephisto. They might rope Loki back into something and do some version of the Avengers Defenders War storyline first. And they're probably ultimately going to try to do Avengers vs. X-Men and Secret Wars where they're tenuous allies. It seems like it'd be kind of sudden, oh, by the way, it's Shadow King. We were planning it all along.
That's partially what I was going for, is I think it would be a kind of a surprise to most people. I don't think a lot of people would see that coming. I think they don't want to be predictable. I think they want it to be something where all of a sudden the carpet is pulled out from underneath and people don't know what to expect and they have people second guessing themselves. Kind of similarly to what happened in this show. You and I kind of had a uniform opinion on what was really going on, and then all of a sudden in episode 6, they showed Agatha Harkness basically pretend to be something different when Vision looked like he did his little thing where he jolted them awake, but actually Agatha was just playing along with it. Just kind of like how in the first couple episodes when we saw Monica Rambeau, she wasn't actually affected by Scarlet Witch's mind control. She was purposely playing along with it and being a character so that she could blend in. It seems like Agatha's been doing that, and it seems like she's been the one that's caused a lot of this chaos. In my theory anyway, I think Shadow King has taken control of her and used her to make Scarlet Witch make things, and I think that's ultimately where this might be going. We're back to speculating on what could Evan Peters' character actually be. Because after watching the sort of, mid-end credit scene, it obviously doesn't seem to be like it's the actual Quicksilver. So do you think that it's somebody that has shapeshifted to look like that? Or do you think they just cast Evan Peters in the MCU as something entirely different? We've kind of talked about this in other episodes, who was that? Do you have any other thoughts or more thoughts on what Evan Peters' character is?
So there's also an Avengers storyline where Wanda was kind of trying to recover from the House of M stuff, and they were trying to make as many different Avengers teams as they could. Hank Pym starts a Avengers team for some reason, and Quicksilver and Wanda both join that team, but Quicksilver gets possessed by Cthon, who I think is the ancient Sumerian chaos god or something. So I think that his appearance in this show is kind of based off of that, but it's probably some minion who may be Nightmare working for Dormammu or Mephisto. Or maybe this is the reanimated body of Pietro that has switched appearance once inside the Hex and somebody else is possessing it.
Just as an aside, something that I recently found out, or something that's come to my attention in the recent past, something that endeared me even more to Elizabeth Olsen just as an actress. I found out that during some of the, probably publicity tours or whatever for some of the Avengers stuff, she was talking about how she was a fan of Scarlet Witch as a kid or whatever, and she was saying how she would love to have been a part of a House of M storyline, and she was saying how it would be sweet if she could play that kind of character or play Scarlet Witch in that sort of storyline. I don't think it was a long game type of play where she put that out there years ago and now all of a sudden they're doing it. She said at the time, I don't think they would ever do that. However, finding out that obviously she's got some knowledge and familiarity with X-Men comics and specifically Scarlet Witch and how the House of M storyline played out in the prior comics, that kind of endeared me more to it. It's kind of similar to how in Star Wars, Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau are Star Wars guys. They were really big fans of Star Wars. They have an understanding of what a Star Wars story is supposed to be. So therefore, I trust them running things. Or when Disney appoints them to do a Star Wars project, I know it's probably going to be good. It's kind of the same way. I feel like I really trust Elizabeth Olsen in this role. Not that I thought she was bad, and I probably would have been fine with her as a character either way. It adds another layer of appeal to her as a person.
Those are the exact type of people you want on this type of project, yeah.
Another thought I had is I actually think that the MCU is reshaping their centerpiece, or sort of reshaping their face of the MCU. Obviously, the very first MCU character was Robert Downey Jr.'s version of Tony Stark / Iron Man, and then they kind of recast Chris Evans into being Captain America, which was ironic just because I actually thought he was pretty good as Human Torch, too, in the 20th Century Fox. I think that they're kind of making Doctor Strange the new Iron Man type character, and I almost think that they're going to eventually make Scarlet Witch the new Captain America type character. I think in doing this show, they really want to give her more character development. They just kind of threw her into Age of Ultron, and then she was kind of along for the ride towards the tail end of the MCU stuff with Thanos and whatnot. I think they're really putting a lot of work into making Scarlet Witch and Doctor Strange sort of the new Captain America and Iron Man. Just kind of a thought that I had recently, and obviously Thor is kind of around still because he's going to be in Guardians of the Galaxy and he's going to be in the next Thor thing where Natalie Portman becomes Thor. Feels like they're kind of phasing him out. I think the two new faces are going to be Scarlet Witch and Doctor Strange, and through this show, and I think probably, which goes along with my Shadow King theory, I think eventually Doctor Strange will sort of show up and solve this, and then I think Agatha Harkness is going to go about doing what she did in the comics, and that sort of helps Scarlet Witch harness her powers, or sort of help train her and refocus her so that she's not as mentally unstable. I think it's going to kind of turn Agatha Harkness into a hero-type character, or somebody that they can use on the quote-unquote hero team when they need some other Thanos-type threat down the line of the timeline, whether it's Kang the Conqueror or whatever they might have planned. That's kind of where my mind's at as far as sort of out there theory. I really like the idea of Shadow King being prevalent right now.
Well, I think with all of the shows that they're doing, it's like a chance to give each of the underdeveloped characters that they haven't really had time with a chance to shine. So yeah, it's kind of like they're hosting a tryouts for who's going to be the next face of the MCU.
Speaking of The Office, considering this show was kind of a nod to The Office, it's almost like when Michael Scott left, it allowed other characters to really shine. It really became more so than before, the Jim and Pam show, but it also let characters like Daryl and Kevin, and specifically Andy Bernard, and obviously Dwight as well, it let them get a lot more screen time. I liked The Office more after season 7, which is kind of an unpopular opinion because everybody loves Michael. And I'm not saying I dislike Michael, I just felt like his shtick got old eventually. Taking us back to the MCU, the whole Captain America Iron Man shtick kind of got old, and obviously the two actors I think are over it. I don't think they really want to be involved anymore. So now this allows somebody like Elizabeth Olsen to shine. She can be the new, I guess, Captain America, for lack of a better term, and obviously Benedict Cumberbatch kind of sells himself. He's kind of in that elite actor echelon where he can carry any project he's a part of, similarly to how Robert Downey Jr. carried the MCU. So I think that makes a lot of sense for those two to be the new focal points.
I used to joke, oh, Captain America 3, you mean Iron Man 6? Spider-Man Homecoming, you mean Iron Man 7? Well, all their contracts are up and they don't want to keep paying them anymore. So yeah, another thing of like how movies are harder to do than comics is that the characters don't stay the same age for 50 years. So you're going to have to find new people.
Did you think that the sort of fast-tracked Photon origin story that they showed, where it was Monica Rambeau going through and hearing a lot of voices and stuff, which, by the way, was kind of a nod to the Rise of Skywalker, it's almost like the same entity runs Marvel and Star Wars. But anyway, did you feel like that was an accurate origin story? I'm not as familiar as you with the Photon character.
Well, she was Captain Marvel when Carol Danvers was still Miss Marvel. For most of her tenure, I think she's been Photon. I don't think I've actually read her actual origin story in comic form. I've just seen her, like, already as a character and, like, already on the teams. So it, like, works as an origin story for her. I think that Carol's gonna get depowered. They're saying that one of the villains she might fight might be Rogue, or someone that's gonna... Because, like, Rogue steals her powers and she gets depowered. Photon might become the Captain Marvel for a little bit.
I'm fine with that if it means less Brie Larson. The fewer Brie Larson, the better, as far as I'm concerned. And from what I understand, she's got herself involved in some sort of Star Wars project that I'm going to completely ignore. So she might be too busy for the MCU type stuff anyway. And I'm totally on board with that. When Agatha kind of had Scarlet Witch trapped in the basement of her house, which I also think might be sort of a nod to the astral plane that Shadow King hangs out in sometimes, but that's besides the point. There was obviously the camera fixated on a book for a few seconds. Do you have any thoughts on that book? What is it? What do you think the significance of that is? All I could really say is that it's probably important, but I can't really say what that would be specifically. Do you have any thoughts?
People are saying it's the Darkhold, which I'm not, like, too familiar with. So, like, Doctor Strange, well, the Sanctum Sanctorum has whole, like, libraries of, like, magical tomes, and it could just be one of the books of the Vishanti that she stole. I'm under the impression that it's the Dark Dimension, because the Dark Dimension in the comics is all, like, glowy and purple and black, like that.
And I guess my fairly limited understanding of the astral plane is that kind of is a similar aesthetic. The only reason that I'm really hesitating to say Dormammu is just because they did that already. Not that I wouldn't put it past Marvel to go back to the same well. I also just think that it's leaving money on the table if they don't create this new idea, whether it's using Nightmare or using Mephisto or my somewhat far-fetched or out there thought of maybe Shadow King. I think if they introduce something new, I think that means more money for them. I don't know if they would all of a sudden go back to the Dormammu.
They're going to trickle stuff in along the way. But I think Dormammu is going to lead to other stuff, because he's been trying to plot revenge. I don't know where the first Doctor Strange movie fits on, like, the Marvel timeline, because that was, like, years of him training and stuff. We know that Captain Marvel happened in, like, the 90s, and, like, Iron Man went to college in, like, 1999, and, like, they say certain dates of, like, when things happen. We can kind of figure that, like, the first Avengers movie happened around 2012, but then there's this, like, 5-year gap, and then who knows how long Doctor Strange would have had to, like, train, and when that Doctor Strange is started kind of separate from the rest of the Avengers-ish stuff. So who knows how long Dormammu would have been plotting this revenge.
I kind of got the impression that all that encounter with Caecilius and the thing where he goes up to Dormammu and uses the Eye of Agamotto to put him in a time loop of never-ending, I've come to bargain, whatnot. I guess I assume that was prior to the Avengers, because at that time he seemed like he was fairly raw in his skills. He didn't seem very refined like he does in the Avengers movies that we see him. You're right, it's probably a few years before the events, because he obviously had more time to train. I think that was just him thinking on his feet and basically fluking his way through that situation. When that movie was going on, he was still fairly new to the sorcery, so to speak. I don't know how much time takes place in between Doctor Strange 1 and the Thanos stuff that he's in. However, I would imagine that it's probably at least a while, because he is very confident in himself and in his skills when the Thanos stuff is happening.
All the single ladies would have had to already be out, so I guess it would have taken place at least in, like, 2009.
I thought that was like late 90s or maybe like very early 2000s. And at the same time, like when Wong was listening to that, it was on like a Walkman too, which was like a very early 2000s.
Well, I think he was listening to it on like an iPod, which is like mid 2000s. Early 2000s is still Destiny's Child.
In the one where they're going back and collecting all the Infinity Stones in different timelines, doesn't Hulk go back to 2012 and talk to the Ancient One? And she's like, you're a few years too early. He's at whatever, doing surgery or something. And he's like, well, yeah, I need the Eye of Agamotto because it's in this timeline and in the future gave it to Thanos. And the Ancient One's like, willingly? Perhaps I've made a grave mistake. And then he's like, well, at the same time, though, if he did it, there probably wasn't any other thing. So wasn't that 2012 when he went back in time and found the Ancient One on the roof or whatever of the mansion or whatever?
Well, 2012 would have been when the first Avengers movie was happening, and Doctor Strange wouldn't have come out yet. But I guess if he's still a surgeon in 2012, that would make kind of sense. Like if he had started right then, and if the Eye of Agamotto is the time gem, he can just like pull a Hermione and like keep turning back time to like learn all the spells and books.
Yeah, I mean, I guess he could relive the same day for thousands of years with that and then still be in the modern day times with all sorts of vast new information.
Yeah, if everything happens in exactly real time, then WandaVision would be taking place in like 2023. If Infinity War came out in 2018, and there were 5 years of chaos and half the world being dead, and then they turned it back, and this is like 3 weeks after that, that's like 2023. But they do still have a time machine, so time technically doesn't matter.
What are your closing thoughts on the show? We didn't even really talk about the contact and how disappointing that ended up being. The Monica Rambeau contact that she alluded to the episode prior. That was kind of a disappointment. I was thinking it was going to be probably Blue Marvel or somebody a little bit cooler than it ended up being. We also didn't really talk about kind of the sinister way that Tyler Hayward was acting at the base.
I mean, it seems like he's acting more scared than sinister at this point.
The way he was asking about the broadcast, that felt a little calculated to me, or that felt a little foreshadowy to me. Just kind of the tone he had when he was asking about it. It seemed like excitable to him more so than relief that the broadcast was dead air or whatnot. I don't know if you had any sort of different takeaway from that or if anybody listening had any sort of different takeaway from that. I basically spent last episode or last time we talked, I was basically saying that Tyler Hayward seemed like a useless throwaway character that was too stupid to have any kind of maniacal plot. Then just the way he was acting during that kind of made me possibly rethink that. I also really like my Shadow King theory and really want that to be the case, so...
Oh, like Shadow King could be possessing him?
The Shadow King thing really allows them to have a lot of flexibility with what they do, just because you never really know where he is unless you're a different telepath that's strong enough. The fact that when Wiccan was in the living room and was saying, I like it here, it's quiet here, he was saying that because if Agatha Harkness is being possessed by Shadow King, he's a strong enough telepath where he can block out Wiccan from being able to read their thoughts. Therefore, that makes sense as to why Wiccan's like, I like it here, it's quiet here, or it's quiet in your insides. Shadow King would be strong enough to block anybody that's not Charles Xavier, essentially, or I guess Emma Frost. Those are really the only two, I guess, telepaths that are also X-Men oriented. To me, the Shadow King thing makes a lot of sense, but at the same time, I'm not really reading or seeing or hearing anybody else talking about that. I really hope that I'm the one that kind of came up with that. I hope I'm the one that called that. We'll see how it goes. What are your final thoughts or predictions for next episode?
Yeah, that would be a twist. I think next episode we're probably going to see if it's Agatha controlling everything, or who she's working for, or like her motivations for even why she would be doing all of this. I think she might be doing it because she made some deal to like protect her. Dormammu kind of powers people up, but like takes control of them. She might have like needed Dormammu to power herself up for something, but now she's got to like do his bidding for some reason.
What do you think happened to Wiccan and Speed? Obviously, we don't know where they went, and also, where do you think Vision is? After Vision phased through the little falafel cart or whatever, we didn't see him again for the rest of the episode, so where do you think he went?
Wait, did he go outside the hex, though? Because if he's still inside the hex, he should be fine. Unless, like, he just kind of stopped working because, like, if Agatha's been controlling it, she didn't need him anymore.
He phased through the top of the cart, but we don't really know where he went, and we didn't see him again in the rest of that episode.
Oh, because he flew off to try to go to Wanda's house.
Yeah, so I guess I'm just wondering, like, where is he, though? Because we didn't see him arrive at any sort of destination.
Probably on the way over.
So do you think he's just at whatever house?
So he'll get there and probably be, like, blocked out or something. Or, like, he'll get there and see fake Pietro fighting with Photon.
But they're not at Wanda's house. That's at Agatha's house.
Wasn't she right next door?
That I'm not really sure, because at certain times in the show it appeared like they were next door neighbors, but also at other times in the show they were walking around looking for the dog, and it seemed like Agatha, who I called, by the way, that Agatha killed the dog. I don't know if I said that on a podcast, but I definitely called that. Anyway, it seemed like they were kind of far away from their own home, but maybe not, though, because Vision showed up from work, and then Agatha came out and was like, I found the dog in the bushes. So, yeah, maybe they are, but also it looked like they walked kind of far away from Wanda's doorstep when Photon was there. It seemed like they traveled further than the next door down.
The houses might just rearrange like dream logic.
Yeah, or that might just be a plot inconsistency, but either way, it doesn't matter that much. But yeah, I guess if they're next door neighbors, it doesn't matter. But
if the houses could do that, Vision could be like flying and flying and flying and like be lost in like a maze of like house rearrangement. He could be flying forever and have like blockers put up in front of him, just like the traffic blockers.
As a closing thought, what do you think Evan Peters is ultimately? Like, what character do you think he's going to end up being? And also, apparently, Kat Dennings as Darcy is a cool enough character to stay as Darcy. I remember last episode you said that she might turn into Abigail Brand, but she turned into essentially herself. That's going to be like the new Agent Coulson, where it was a cool enough gag character where it's just going to stay a character and be written into the comics, probably.
Yeah, probably. I'm going to say Pietro is Chthon in service of Dormammu.
Sounds good. That'll wrap it up for this week. Thanks everybody for listening, and we'll catch you in the next one.